Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Chayei with your host, myself, Rabbi Anibal, and I'm very happy to be here once again so we can all learn Torah together. I was trying to think the other day, how long have I been running Torah Chayei, and it was over 15 years. 15 years, I believe, uninterrupted, which is quite amazing, and always finding fresh commentaries and rabbinic opinions, and texts, so we can always study something new. That's the beauty of Torah, right? Doesn't matter for how long you study Torah, there is always something new, fresh, inspiring that you can learn from it. So yeah, welcome Priscilla Kerr. Welcome Rocky Pollack. Ruvain is here. Andrea Arroyave, welcome to the class. Welcome to the class. It's good to have a Torah as part of our routine. In fact, it's supposed to be a daily mitzvah. There are certain mitzvot. You know, when I'm teaching Jews in Judaism, I like to explain that there are commandments that we do every day, commandments we do once a week, commandments we do once a month, commandments we do once a year. So like let's say Passovers once a year, right? Shabbat once a week. But there are certain commandments that they are for every day, like kashrut. Kashrut, it is not something you should do once a year, something you should do it every day. Tzedakah, it's something you should do every day. And limud Torah, studying Torah, is something that you should do every day. So it's always good to find a way to study a little bit of Torah every day, or at least every week at a fixed time. That is very important. Rocky, I like that we, of course, it's we. I'm always learning, and that's why I always encourage all of you guys to use the chat, to let me know what you think, your understanding, and I'm learning all the time from your comments. Marta Castro is here. Welcome to the class, Marta. Welcome. So, I need to share with you a little disclaimer before we start the class. This class is going to be shorter, about 10-15 minutes shorter, because I have a funeral. The funeral was set for 2 p.m. It was not announced. It's a private funeral that it's not going to be streamed. So I said, okay, no problem. You know, I finished the class at 1, and I can easily make it to the cemetery at 2, but it's a person with almost no family and no friends, so there were no pallbearers. And now I have to serve as a pallbearer. I have to do the Chesed Shelemes, and if I don't finish the class earlier, I won't make it on time to start the funeral at 2. But this could be also a blessing in disguise for everyone, so we can study a little bit about the Jewish value of Levayat Hamet and Kivud Hamet. Levayat Hamet is the Hebrew term that we use for funeral. Levayat means to accompany the dead. That's because in a Jewish funeral there's always a procession, right? In Yiddish, they still call it Levaye. The funeral is a Levaye. I don't know if you ever heard that term, Levaye, but in Hebrew it's Levayat Hamet, and also Kivud Hamet, or Kavod Hamet, which means to honor the deceased. And the Halakha, Jewish law, has a very specific ruling of what happened when you have an overlap in between a Torah class and a funeral. What do you do? And they are clear that they say that the value of Levayat Hamet and Kavod Hamet is higher than studying Torah. So if you have to choose between studying Torah and attending a funeral is always first. And this is something that I learned many years ago when I was still in Chile. I was still a cantor, but I was teaching lots of bar mitzvah students. So what do you do if you have to teach a bar mitzvah student and I'm needed for a funeral at the same time? I know that sometimes could depend on the internal politics of the synagogue, but I wanted to know from a halachic point of view, what is the right thing to do? And halakha is very clear. the funeral takes always precedence. So I'm sorry, I'm going to cut the class short, but maybe because I'm cutting the class short, we can use this as an opportunity to study what Jewish law says about what happened when you're in a situation like this. Welcome, Randy Lodinger. Welcome to the class. So we're going to start right away with this week's Parsha. It's called Chayei Sarah, talking about funerals. Chayei Sarah means the life of Sarah. Sarah was Abraham's wife. She was our first matriarch. And it's called the lives of Sarah, but it's talking about the death of Sarah, which is very interesting. Very interesting. Marta Castro says, should we also go for people that do not have Jewish faith? Yeah, any funeral. In fact, there is a text in the Talmud that it says that it put it together. Let me think for a second. I was just teaching that last Sunday. It's talking about tzedakah, chesed, and funerals. So basically it says that we do tzedakah, we give charity, we do act of kindness, and we go to funeral, we take care of funerals at the same way for Jews and non-Jews. Okay? The Talmud already ruled about that. For those three things, we don't discriminate. Tzedakah, act of kindness, and funerals, we don't discriminate. Okay, so let's study about this parsha, the death of Sarah. And I want to start today not talking necessarily about the death of Sarah, because that's a wonderful opportunity to learn, but we studied that last year. So if you want to know more about the episode of the death of Sarah, you can check last year Torah Chayei on this same parsha, and I'm pretty sure we talk about that. Today I want to talk about what happened after. Okay, what happened after Sarah died. So it's interesting. And hold on a minute. Okay. So here, yeah. What happened is Abraham went and bought the plot for Sarah. Okay, so she was buried. And after that, it's interesting because all of a sudden he realizes he's back to the tent. He's alone. He looks at his son and he looks at Isaac, and Isaac is unmarried. And I don't know, I think Abraham realized, I'm getting older, my son is getting older, he's not married. So he starts making arrangements for Isaac to find a wife. So back in the day, and it still happens in some traditional communities, I would say, marriages were arranged. So, but Abraham wanted a good wife for his son. And I guess he didn't really like the local women. So he wanted to get a woman from where he was coming from, which is interesting because remember the previous parsha that he had to leave. He has to leave the place where he was born. The Torah doesn't really say why, but it looks like one of the greatest people there. But anyway, Abraham realized that to get a wife for his son, that place is a little bit better than the place where they are now, at least for certain values. So let me bring this text for all of you. Well, hello, David and Brenda Grossman. Welcome to the class. Welcome to the class. So what happened is Abraham sent his servant. The Torah doesn't really say the name here, but we know that it's Eliezer through the Midrash. That's the name of his servant. He sent the servant to the house of Laban, one of his family members, to find a wife for Isaac. And this is the description of what happened when the servant of Abraham arrived to the house of Laban. Let me read this for you. So it says, so the man came into the house, okay? And Laban ungirded the camels and gave him straw and provender for the camels and water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. Then food was set before him to eat, but he said, I will not eat until I have told my errand. And he said, speak on. So he said, I am Abraham's servant. Okay? Nothing special about this, except that the rabbis find very interesting what Laban did and the order of what Laban did in front of Eliezer. And again, it's interesting because later on we are going to realize that Laban wasn't necessarily a good person, or at least he was a cheater. But it looks like that the cheating gene ran in the family, because it's exactly the same of what is going to happen with Isaac's wife, and then with Jacob. You'll see. But nevertheless, he was a cheater, but he has some very interesting values in his life that I guess the Torah is trying to highlight here. You see, not everything was wrong with Laban. He has some very good traits of character. Which ones? Well, let's see what the Midrash Haggadol says about Laban. It says, first, he fed the animals, and afterward, he was served food. For it is forbidden for a person to taste anything until he feeds the animal. Okay? Eliezer did it, and Laban facilitated that from there. So, the rabbis are learning, actually, halakha. They're learning, actually, a little bit of law from this text, and said, first, you always have to feed the animals, and afterwards, you are allowed to eat. I don't know if you ever heard this teaching, or I don't know what is your attitude, because in this day and age, most people will have a pet at home, and if that's the case, it's talking about the kind of care that we have to our pets. But it also has to do with back in the farming days of the Jewish people, when people used to have lots of animals, was the attitude. So basically it said you have to take care of the animals first, and then you can take care of yourself. Why? Well, because the animals, sometimes if they live in a barn, for example, they cannot take care of themselves. They need somebody to provide the food for them. They cannot do it by themselves, so you have the obligation to do it. Now, from this and other similar texts in the Torah, the rabbis are trying to understand what should be our attitude towards animals. So in other words, is there such a thing of a Jewish attitude towards animals? Is it a Jewish value? Is it a Jewish value to be, for example, merciful or to take care of animals? What do you think? I want to know your opinions about this. And if you have pets, please, I would like to know what do you do? I think this is a fascinating thing that we learn from the Torah. Even though most people will do it naturally, the Torah still has lots to say about this. That's why I'm curious. I'm curious about what's your opinion of what you do with your own animals. And I will give you another example that the Torah will say, for example, that if you have a cow, you need to, for example, milk the cow on Shabbat, even though many of the things on Shabbat will be forbidden, because otherwise, if you don't milk the cow on Shabbat and that milk accumulates, the cow will be in pain, so you have to do it. So there are many things in the Torah towards being kind to animals. Okay, so while you think, what do you want to type in the chat? Let me continue with the sacred text. Now we are going to go to the Talmud and try to understand what the rabbi said. Oh, Priscilla. So let's say what Priscilla had to say. You say, I do that too. Forget it. My cat always sees me entering the house and he cries and waits for me to feed him before I even take my jacket off. Yeah, very good. You see, now you can understand that when you do that, you're having a Jewish attitude. And then he said, Randy, he said, I feed stray cat when he should out before I eat. I think we must feed the hungry people first as well. Of course. But you see, we talk all the time about feeding people or clothing people, but we don't talk too often about what Judaism says towards animals. And you will see even in the early parts of the Torah, like the book of Genesis, there is still lots of examples of kindness towards animals. Okay. So, Rocky Pollack, you say, my granddogs want priority when I come to visit my grandchildren. Yep. Yep. I remember once asking a group of people who were studying something similar to this. What do you do if there is a fire in your house, right? If you have your animals and you have people inside, who do you save first? And you can read their minds. You know what they want to say, but they don't want to say it out loud. That they probably want to save the animals first, right? But nevertheless, that was a funny situation. Rocky said, but I tend to fight them off. Oh, okay. Okay, so let's go to the Talmud. What happened here? It's very interesting. It said, Rabbi Judah, in Rab's name, said, if an animal falls into a dike, one brings pillows and bedding and places them under it. And if it ascends, it ascends. An objection is raised. If an animal falls into a dike, provisions are made for it when it lies, so it could not perish. Thus, only provisions, but not pillows and beddings. There is no difficulty. Here it means where provisions are possible. There where provisions are impossible. If provisions are possible, well and good. But if not, one brings pillows and bedding and places under it. But he robs a utensil of its readiness for use. The avoidance of suffering of animals is a biblical law. So the biblical law comes and supersedes the interdict of the rabbis. So in other words, this is interesting, and I don't know all the details about this. And this is the funny thing about the Talmud, okay? I have the complete Talmud with all the explanation and everything, but it's on storage until the building on Wellington Crescent is done. So I'm somehow limited on when I had to present to you some of the Talmudic things, and I don't have my Talmud to fully read everything. I was trying to understand what the Talmud means when it said he robs a utensil of its readiness for use. Okay, but it looks like it's talking about the things you use, pillows and beddings. That, you know, why are you going to use this if you can use it for something else? That seems to be rabbinic law. But the point here is the Talmud, Masechet Shabbat. It's saying that the avoidance of suffering of animals is a biblical law. Okay? And you know, whenever you have a biblical law and a rabbinic law, biblical law comes always first. So this is something very important, and so just for all of us to remember. The avoidance of suffering of animals is a biblical law. So, hungry animals are suffering, so you have to avoid it. That's a biblical law. And so it's very important for us to understand stuff like that. And that's why, and it's interesting because, again, we always say that in the times of Abraham, the Torah was not revealed. So how did Eliezer know, or Laban, how did they know that they should feed the animals before they feed the person? And, well, it's something that we should all know. We should all know. Sometimes the Torah comes to remind us what we should know. Sometimes we just either forget or don't pay attention. Okay? Just know it, biblical law saying that avoidance of suffering the animals. Okay? So let's continue, and I want to bring to you here a commentary by Rabbi Sachs, who his insights are always welcomed. And he says something very interesting in his opening statement. He says, Judaism regards animals as sentient beings. In other words, animals have feelings. And we study many times here in this class about how Judaism considers the feelings of a person on many of the rulings. Is, for example, when Judaism insists about the avoidance of embarrassment. Well, embarrassment is, at the end of the day, a very strong feeling that we all have to always avoid. Nobody likes to be embarrassed, and we all know how we feel when we are embarrassed in public. So the measurements of people's feelings is very common in Jewish law. But what about the measurements of animal feelings when we think what to do or not to do to animals? Okay. Bye, Priscilla. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me. Have a wonderful day. So, Judaism regards animals as sentient beings. They may not think or speak, at least not the way we do, right? That's what he means. But they do feel. Hello, Denise. Welcome to the class. We are talking about animal suffering here. And Judaism, of course. So, they are capable of distress. There is such a thing as cruelty to animals. And as far as possible, it should be avoided. Okay? Well, is it as far as possible? Because at the end of the day, we all know that if you have to choose between an animal and a person, right? About saving a life, for example, a person comes always first. But I will say that situations like that may never come to you, when you have to choose, really, because it's a situation of life and death. Never happens to us, right? It's very rare. So, in any other circumstances, okay, we have to avoid any kind of cruelty to animals, and we have to do whatever we can to help them. So, Andrea said, but what about the suffering they go through for us to eat them? That's coming later. Hopefully we have time to do it today, but it's part of the class about that. But just as a little hint, that's why the laws of how we butcher an animal in order to eat it. We understand that there are humane way of doing it, and there are inhumane ways of doing it. Okay? And then there are lots of theological implications of everything. About an animal, for example, when you eat an animal, it becomes part of a person, and it gives you the energy to fulfill a mitzvah. So through that, and this is, again, just in a nutshell, it's way more complicated, but you are elevating the animal life into now fulfilling a mitzvah through you. But that's a different thing, and we have lots of rules on how an animal has to be butchered. Okay, but I'm gonna touch that topic a little bit today. Hopefully, let's continue with Rabbi Sachs. So Rabbi Sachs says, for example, we read in Deuteronomy chapter 25 verse 4, do not muzzle an ox when it's treading grain. What is striking about this law is that it parallels provisions for human beings as well. When you come to work in your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat as many grapes as you desire to satisfy your hunger. However, you may not put any into a receptacle that you may have. When you come to work in your neighbor's standing grain, you may take the ears with your hand. However, you may not lift the sickle for your own benefit in your neighborhood grain. The principle is the same in both cases. It is cruel to prevent those working with food from eating some of it. To be sure, in the case of humans, there is a delicate balance of reciprocal responsibility. The employer must allow his employee to eat, but the employee must not engage in petty theft. But the parallel is instructive. Animals too have feelings, and they must be respected. Okay? So, I don't know if you ever knew that about when you're working on according to the Torah, in a yard, you can eat whatever is there, but you cannot take it home. So, it's very interesting. Ooh, I'm thirsty today. Okay? So, let's continue. Next text is coming from Rabbi David Blech, and he says, Torah sources serve only to demonstrate that animals' directed conduct, which is compassionate in nature, constitutes a good deed, but do not serve to establish a system of responsibilities. Okay? So let's go slowly here. Particularly in light of the strong halachic element present in Judaism, the absence of everyday regulation might well be regarded as indicative of the absence of serious ethical concerns for the welfare of members of the animal kingdom. So the rabbi here is opening with a very interesting question. I say, okay, but we all know that we don't have to be cruel to animals and things, but there seems to be nothing specific or detailed in the Torah about that. Of course, we can learn from the episode of Eliezer that I read at the beginning of the class, and a couple more verses in the Torah. But I say, what about that? There is no everyday regulation of a relationship with animals in the Torah. Okay, isn't that an indication that there is not a serious problem? That's a fair question, and good for the rabbi. This rabbi that actually he wants to know more about it. That's why he continues. But this is demonstrably not the case. For in Jewish teaching, there is no lack of laws designed to protect and promote animal welfare. How so? The most obvious example of a regulation having such an effect, and one which is clearly biblical in origin, is contained in the verse, "If you see the donkey which belongs to someone who hates you, lying down helpless under its load, you are not pass him by, but go and help him free it." You understand what happened here? You have somebody whom you hate. We always have somebody that we don't like, or maybe the person doesn't like you, so you don't like the person. And every time we see this person, we say, "Oh, I want to punch this person in the face," right? Never mind. One day you're walking on the street and you see the donkey of this person that you don't like, and the donkey is suffering under a big load, and this person is nowhere to be found. So you may think, "Oh, this is a good thing. His animal, his property is suffering. So this is payback." No, Judaism said that's not a Jewish attitude. It said the poor animal has nothing to do with whatever problems you have with your neighbor. So you have the obligation to go and help the animal because the animal is suffering. The fact that that animal belongs to somebody that you don't like is irrelevant. You need to help that animal because the animal is in pain. So you see, this is a direct law to help us understand that animal suffering is never okay. Hello, BQ Zichri from England. Welcome to the class. Welcome to the class. You see, it's interesting. For you, it's Erev Tov, which is good evening. For us, it's good afternoon. It's 12:33 here in Winnipeg. 12:33 p.m. What time is there in England? Just for the record, so I'm curious. What is our time difference? Okay, so let's continue here. The self-same concern is manifest in the prohibition against muzzling an ox while it thrashes, in order that the animals be free to eat of the produce while working. Similarly, Scripture provides that both domestic animals and wild beasts must be permitted to share in produce of the land which grows without cultivation during the sabbatical year. Oh, in England, look, 6:34 p.m. Thank you. Wow, 6 hours difference. So basically what happened back here, sabbatical year, is a year that we humans are not allowed to eat anything from the ground. We have to let it rot. But the animals are allowed to eat it. The animals are allowed to eat it. Well, because we humans, we can find other ways. We can store food from previous years. We have other means to provide for ourselves. The animals don't, so they're allowed to eat it because otherwise they will suffer, which is very interesting. Denise, I missed your comment. You said, if God had so many animals conserved after the flood, why would he condone abuse against them or not want them saved from suffering? Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. But you will be surprised how many people will say, well, that's their animals' mission on Earth and stuff like that. Anyway, but yeah, I will think like you, Denise. Let's continue. Sabbath laws contained in both formulation of the Ten Commandments reflect a concern which goes beyond the mere elimination of pain and discomfort and serve to promote the welfare of animals in a positive manner by providing for the rest of the Sabbath day. You see, it says, by the seventh day is a Shabbat for Adonai your God. On it, you are not to do any kind of work, not you, your son or your daughter, not your male or female slave, not your ox, your donkey, or any of your other livestock, and not the foreigner staying with you inside the gates of your property, so that your male and female servants can rest just as you do. You see, it says even the animals have to rest on Shabbat. You cannot send an animal do whatever you cannot do on Shabbat. Even more explicit in expressing concern for the welfare of animals is the verse, but on the seventh day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may have rest. Okay? So even because if they don't rest, they suffer. And we cannot make an animal suffer. Okay. Let's continue. Now, Andrea, answering your question, you were talking about what about suffering when that they go through when we want to eat an animal. This was actually discussed by the rabbis when they realized that we have a very specific way to kill an animal for consumption. It's not that we just can take it. So there are many things. For example, some of the things, and that was one of the earliest biblical regulations, is that we are not allowed to just to take a part of a living animal to eat it. So you cannot cut a leg of an animal and just eat the leg and leave the rest of the animal to live. That is absolutely forbidden because the animal will be suffering. Okay? So the first thing it says is if you want to eat an animal, you have to kill it first. And then the rabbi said, if you have to kill an animal before you are allowed to eat it, it has to be done in a very precise way. So let's go to Rambam, to the Maimonides, and I want to share with all of you what he said in his Guide for the Perplexed, Moreh Nevuchim in Hebrew, and it says, it is also prohibited to kill an animal with its young on the same day, for example. Okay, so look, it's not just that we kill an animal in a special way. Now, on top of that, you are not allowed to kill an animal and with its young on the same day. When Maimonides explained, in order that people should be restrained and prevented from killing the two together in such a manner that the young is slain in the sight of the mother. For the pain of the animals under such circumstances is very great. Remember, this was written in the Middle Ages, by the way, right? This is Maimonides. This is not something that it was written, last year in a magazine talking about social justice. We were always aware of this, of that level of animal suffering, to the point that said, don't kill, for example, even if it's in a kosher way, don't kill an animal, the young of the animal in front of the mother. That's cruel. Okay? For the pain of the animals under such circumstances is very great. There is no difference in this case between the pain of man and the pain of other living beings, since the love, a tenderness of the mother for her young ones, is not produced by reasoning, but by imagination, and this faculty exists not only in man, but in most living being. So Maimonides takes it to the next level, the kind of feelings that the animals have. So going back to your question, Andrea, the way we kill the animal, it has to be with a quick cut in the side of the neck. And it's very complex the way it's done, but it was understood that it is a humane way of killing the animal. But at the same time, we drain from all the blood from the animal, considering that the Bible considers the blood of the animal the source of their life, so that we are not even allowed to eat it. We cannot eat only the meat, but not the life represented by the blood. Any questions? Okay. And I wanted to share with you, because we are running out of time. As I was mentioning at the beginning, I have to go to a funeral, so we have only 4 or 5 more minutes. And yes, so not rare or medium rare. Well, depends. If you buy kosher meat, yes, you can do it, because most of the blood was already removed. When you buy a kosher steak, you're not eating blood. The blood was removed by the way the animal was butchered, which is called death by exsanguination. I know it sounds terrible, but that's the way it's called, by exsanguination, by blood extraction. And sorry, I'm going to be a little graphic, but you have to understand that is achieved by not just by the cut, but also by hanging. So you let gravity to take all the blood out of the body. On top of that, you have to cut the animal open and cut the different pieces of meat. Then you have to use salt to absorb all the rest of blood on that meat. And then you have to wash out all the salt with the blood. And then you can sell. That's when this gets packaged and put in the supermarket shelf. That's why kosher meat is so expensive, for all the process that it involves. But it's the only way for us to be sure that we don't eat blood. Okay? That's why it's so special about kosher meat. It's not just the cut. It's all the process that will extract the blood. Yeah. And then once you get the kosher steak, that with all that process already done, then yes, you can have it rare or medium rare. Okay, so one more thing that I want to talk to you today. It has nothing to do with the animals, but it has to do with the funerals. And as I said, because I'm going to the funeral right now, I got inspired by this next verse that I wanted to share with you. And it's teaching us about a very important mitzvah that we have, or we should have, at every funeral. And that is the mitzvah of the eulogy. Okay? Something that is interesting, that sometimes it's the question, who should present the eulogy? The Jewish answer is it's always the family. It's always the family. And I know sometimes the family likes to delegate to the rabbi to do it, but at least they should be the one providing all the information. Okay? Because this is coming from this parsha. It's coming from the Torah. It has biblical origins, the same way that the burial underground has biblical origins. And why is the eulogy so important? It's coming from this week's parsha. And I read. Genesis chapter 23, verse 2 said, Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, also known as Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham came to eulogize Sarah and weep for her. The word for eulogize in Hebrew, lispod lesara. That's why the Hebrew word for eulogy is hesped. Lispod, hesped. Okay? So it says that Abraham came to say hesped, to eulogize Sarah, veliv kota, and to weep for her. But can you see here, you will see in the Hebrew or in the English, I put this letter that is a little smaller. Can you see it? I hope you can. It's not a mistake. It's not a typo. I did it purposely like that, because that's the way it's written in the Torah. The word liv kota, and to cry or to weep, one of the letters is smaller, and the rabbis try to explain why that letter is smaller. And what they say is, when a person died, we cry. We cry because the person is gone, right? person is gone. We feel it deeply in our soul. The person is gone. But then if you can eulogize the person, in the sense that if you can realize all the good things that they did, everything, their legacy, everything that is still with you from that person. And that is the process of eulogizing, right? When you have to recount somebody else's life, but then you realize how much of that life stays with you, right? If you can do that process, then the rabbis say through the Midrash, looking at the word veliv kotha, then your weeping, your crying diminishes, because that's the beginning of finding comfort. And that's how they explain the smaller letter, veliv kotha, because it comes after the hesped, after the eulogy. So the eulogy is not just something that is present in the Bible, so it's biblical in origin. It's something that it should help us to begin the healing process after a loss. Okay, and it's also coming from this parsha. Sorry guys, I have to go today. Again, if you came late, I have a funeral to attend. I have to be a pallbearer, and that takes some extra time for me to go to the Chesed Shelemes, and the roads are a little bit difficult. So yeah. So the class is going to be rebroadcasted tonight at 8 p.m. Central Time if you missed the first part. And you can also watch it from our YouTube channel on demand every time you want. So that's the other alternative. So thank you everyone for coming to this Torah L'Chaim. Don't forget, we meet every Thursday at noon. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Please stay safe and hope to see you soon. Bye everyone.